Welcome again to the FME Virtual World Tour 2020. So this is the Platform Scenarios talk. And as a quick introduction, my name is Brian Pont, and I'm the support manager here at Safe Software. And with me today, I have Jen Luther Thomas. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am newly an FME cloud expert on the experts team at Safe, although I was previously an FME server expert for around just over 3 years. So I know a lot about FME server, and I'm taking that knowledge across to FME cloud to expand in that area.
So yeah, like our team is very focused on sharing knowledge. That's really what we do. We help with support, and I'm sure many of you watching have talked to us in the past. And today we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to share some knowledge about 2020 and what we know, and hopefully have a little bit of fun with it. So what we're going to do is look at two different scenarios today, two demos where we're going to make use of the entire FME platform. Very excited to do that. And if you haven't been following along, our theme has been FME Wellness, or a wellness theme, for all of our World Tour talks this year. And so we've taken the same theme and applied it to two demos today that we're going to share. We're also going to walk through a few of the new features in FME 2020. And these we've definitely talked about in other webinars, so we're going to give a few links there. We may not get as in-depth or do many demos on the new stuff, but hopefully you'll get a sense of some of the new things during our demos today. What I want to do first before we get into it is give you a bit of a secret. And that is the fact that every time you use FME, there's really two things that you need to think about. The first, shown on this slide here, is building your workspace, or building up the logic that you want your data to go through. So maybe that's connecting to a specific source and then manipulating that data and then sending it out to a destination of your choice. That's really what you want to be thinking about in step one. And then step two, how do you run it? You could run it just by clicking your finger and running the workspace, or you can do automation, which is an amazing thing that can help you save time and resources. FME Server is a big part of automation, and we're going to show various ways that you can use that today in a few of our demos. Um, in particular, what I want to highlight on this slide is the fact that you can start workspaces based on many different triggers, from emails coming into the system to schedules overnight, particularly maybe you're sleeping and your data is being migrated. Those are really helpful things that FME can help you do. All right, the first demo. So with that wellness theme, and with the fact that we were going to be traveling all over North America and other partner events, we thought of an app that might help us. And that's the fact that when we're on the road, we don't really know where to get good food. And also, we don't always have the same activity level as we're used to being home. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It's kind of a mixed bag. And so we wanted to build an app with FME to help us manage that and give us some suggestions based on how active we've been. And so we want to get to the state where we're this lizard with our juice in our hands and feeling super happy and well. So here's what we did is we've built an app with FME to connect to our health data. And in this case, I'm using my iPhone step counter. And we're going to analyze that using a variety of FME transformers. And then we're going to get a web service to suggest the best places for us to go visit. Now, of course, with the pandemic and everything that's happening in the world, we've had to change this a little bit. So we were really excited to use this on the road, but now since I'm at home, I'm going to still use this, but tweak it just slightly. And maybe it's just finding places locally that can Uber Eats me something to have as a snack. But this is still very, very helpful. The other thing I wanted to highlight is where my activity is coming from these days. And so this is a pretty good graph of that, looking like one of those, I guess, train or subway maps. The one that's not in here, which would be a big, probably giant red line of sorts, is kid wrangling, which I've been doing a lot of. So it'd probably look like, I don't know, chaos in the middle of all this organized traffic. But Yeah, this is really speaking to how I think a lot of us are feeling these days at home. So let's jump into this a bit. I want to say that, with this example, it is a little bit humorous and not the everyday work that you may be doing with FME, but there are still some aspects of it that are universal. And that is the fact that we're going to connect to a variety of different data sources. In this case, some web services and XML and geopackaged data. And we'll be transforming that data. So looking at it, we want to make decisions based off of that. And so we have to manipulate it using FME. And then finally, we're going to automate that process and just make it deliver information to us when we need it, as we need it. So that's going to be really helpful. And that you can think about for all the different workflows that you build with FME. So a few things to watch for. Often actually on the road when I'm looking and talking to all the different FME users, it's such a mixed group, and there are experts and there are complete beginners to FME. And often the question comes, how are you going to show a demo that applies to all the different groups here? And this is how I want to do it today, is I want to show a few of the best practices that can come about when you're building workspaces, which I think everybody can relate to. And in fact, some of these features are newer to the platform, and we've been adding them over the last few years. It's completely actually changed the way I build workspaces with FME, and so I'm hoping to highlight that for everyone. We also want to talk about web APIs and how, in particular, back to here to the FME Hub, how the FME Hub can help you work with different web services, as many of those tools have already been built. They're just not in the core product that gets installed with FME. In particular, let's highlight these feature caching and visual preview. I will be extensively talking about as we go. Transformer presets, and also web and database connections. Both of those are methods to help you be more effective and I guess efficient as well with FME, so that you don't have to type the same connection details or the same transformer settings in again and again every time you use FME desktop. You can save those and reuse those again for all your different workspaces that you build. All right, so let's jump into it. We're going to build this as a report. This is our output. This is what we're trying to get to. And it's going to look at our overall step count and suggest, based on a few settings, where we might want to go get something to snack on and include a map with that, which is always very handy. And so the first thing I'm going to do is actually leave the presentation here and we'll load up FME. Let's make this a little bit bigger so everyone can see. I'm just going to expand this out. That looks pretty good. And I want to give you a highlight of what I'm about to build so you have an idea of where this is going. So the first thing we're going to do is connect to my steps data. We're going to get an XML file for that. And we're going to do some statistics on it. So just getting an average of the total steps for a period of time. We're going to merge that with some location data. This is data of all the world tour stops that we were planning to go on. And I've included one special new stop that we weren't planning to go on that we can talk about in a minute. The next piece is we're going to send that data up to Yelp. So once we've processed it and we've had a way to think about it, we want to send it to Yelp to give us some recommendations. And we're going to use the FME Hub to talk to Yelp. And then we'll create a report from the results. So not too many transformers, not too many steps, but hopefully a good overview of some of the features and functionality within FME. So let's get into it. Here is the first thing that we're going to pull in, which is a custom transformer called the Apple Steps Extractor. Put that there. And what this does is it reads an XML file, which we can grab. Now I've exported this just from my phone, did that this morning. And I'm going to go back just 8 days. I think I took a big walk, so I want to goose the numbers a little bit about 8 days ago. So we'll keep that in there, see what we get. And I'm going to click OK. And so right at this point, I can read this data in. So I'm going to run this. And I want to talk briefly about feature caching. So remember in that slide of things to watch for, that was the number one thing that we listed. And that's a setting actually in the run section up top where you can enable feature caching like this. I've already got it turned on. And what it does is at every step along the way, so every transformer or reader writer that you put in, every object, it will store the data as you run it at that section. And as we go, I'll show you why that's so powerful. So you can see here, I'm reading this in, and away we go. Give that just a minute. Actually, you'll know that it did take a few seconds to bring that in, but because I've now stored this as a cache, I can use this cache as we build the workspace, and it's much faster. You can imagine if this were something that went up to the web, for example, and pulled down a lot of data, you don't want to be doing that again and again as you're just building and testing a workspace. So turning on feature caching when you're building up your logic in your workflow is a great method. And pairing that with another feature called Visual Preview, which you can see here, you can now start to see the data as you're working with it and manipulating it. So this is the data coming out of my XML file. So that's a great 1-2 punch, these caches and the Visual Preview window. So go to the next step. We're going to add a statistics calculator. Connect that up. Remember, I want to just get an average of all those steps I've been taking. So we'll set this up. The statistics calculator in 2020 got a really big refresh. We rewrote it. You'll see that if you've ever used it before, this dialog looks quite different. And we've got the statistics in a nice table here. But what you don't see is that the processing power is vastly improved. We've, in some cases, made this faster by 100 times, which is an incredible number. So even just upgrading older workspaces to 2020 that use this will have a big impact on your work. So again, I'm going to use that cache, so I don't have to do all the processing again. I can just read it directly from here, the stored data, and we'll push it through the statistics calculator. That seems to be working well. Now it's time to do a merge. So I'm going to call in a feature reader, which is a unique transformer. It's basically putting the ability to read data in as your data flows through the workspace. And so I'm doing a bit of a join by doing this. And remember I said this is data from all the different World Tour stops. And I also said I added a little secret one. So let's get that secret one in here. It is all the venues, including Vancouver, which we didn't have a scheduled stop for this year. But in fact, I added one to the database. It is the location of my house. And I'm very proud to say that I've hosted the only kind of house party for FME Roadshow or World Tour, I think, in existence. So I'm going to kind of parade that around the office once we get back into gear with everybody and gloat a little bit that I've hosted that World Tour event. The other thing I want to do, so we're reading in a GeoPackage database, but here I want to add a filter because I don't actually need all those other cities at this point. I just need Vancouver. And of course, I want to join everything together. So we're going to merge the initiator, which is our health data, with the result, which is the location of the Vancouver World Tour. And click OK. And again, I'm going to run this with the caches. So it's going to read it from the statistics calculator and read it through the feature reader. If we're lucky, we can make sure that this works. So yeah, we've got a point and we've got our steps. So life is very good. You can see it on the map there. We're in Vancouver. I like where this is going. Now I'm going to add an attribute manager. It's a really powerful transformer. You can do, well, let's open it up and I'll show you. But you can create attributes in here. You can merge them. You can change the values. You can do a lot of different things. What I want to show you is a setting that we've added, or a new feature we added last year, which is called presets. And what presets does is it stores your settings for that transformer across all your workspaces. So I've got one saved. Load that up. And so you can save these at any time. You can delete them. You can change them. They're really, really great for saving you a lot of time. And we're doing two things. One, we're just rounding off the daily steps. And two, we're building out a basically a big if-else statement. So a big um, question to create an attribute called search terms that we're going to share to Yelp. And so basically I need to figure out what am I asking Yelp for? And I want to base that on how active I was. So let's open this up. This is called a conditional value in FME, and you can build these in the attribute manager. But if we look at it, I'm looking at the different steps in this rounded total. So when they're less than 3,000, I want to do something. When they're in the middle, let's expand that between 3 and 7. I'm asking for a nice juice or smoothie that we can Uber Eats to me. Or if I'm doing well, which in this case I've kind of put at 7,000 steps. Not too ambitious, I know, but still in this time, it's pretty good. I will then be able to say I deserve that ice cream or that frozen yogurt. And so this is the categories that Yelp is actually going to go to. So there's our big conditional statement. The rest stays the same, and we're good to go. I want to actually backtrack because I forgot to show something, which is the fact that I can make this feature reader a little bit more, what's the right word? Powerful, I guess, for lack of a better word, where I can add some flexibility to the end user by allowing them to input data into this workspace when it runs to change the way it runs. And what I mean by that is I can make this a variable, and then the user can put in whatever city they want. So if this were to be used by the other teams when we were going to be going out on the roadshow, they'd be able to just put in Calgary or Houston in here. And so I want to show you how I would do that. Here's the where clause builder. And what I can do is instead of having Vancouver just hard coded in here, I realize I'm using a lot of programming terms today, which is interesting. Anyways, we have a published parameter here, and we can create that, and this would be called city. So where or what city are you? Social distancing in, and as a default, we'll put Vancouver back in. So this, when you run it, let's click OK there, and just give you an example. This will then prompt the user before everything runs for some inputs. And you could imagine yourself doing this for all kinds of different scenarios in your own workflows. So it's very, very powerful. Okay, I'm going to run this again. I think I've invalidated my caches by click and run there maybe, but let's run it. And while that's going, let's talk about Yelp. So we've got a Yelp connector. You'll notice it's green. That's because it comes from the FME hub. And what this does is it uses the Yelp API to allow us to ask Yelp a few questions. So for example, I've got a web connection already set up, so it's got my credentials to the API ready to go. I'm going to enter a search term, which is that attribute that we previously built in the attribute manager. And I'm going to give it a search radius. So I want to go a little bit wide in a big circle around my house to give me some good options. Probably put, yeah, 2.5 kilometers there. And I want not too many results, probably 5 results is good. If you're using this yourself, there's other settings in the in the results that you can change. So like when you use the Yelp online, you can change to search by rating or distance or review count, but I'm gonna go best match. Okay, and just to confirm that's working, let's run it again from the cache, and then we can look at the visual preview and see if we get some results in there. Which we do, it's perfect. I'm liking that. And the final step is let's create a report. So I'm going to use two key things to make a report out of this. The first is the HTML report generator. I'll put that in. We'll connect the places up to it. And the second is just an HTML writer. So we need a location to save this. Let's go into my directory here. I've got one that we can overwrite. Let's replace it. Perfect. And that will drop an HTML writer on the canvas. We'll connect it there. So what the HTML report generator does is it builds out the actual HTML into an attribute, and then the HTML writer will store that on my hard disk. And what I want to do is again use presets. I'm going to load up all my settings because I've pre-done this. So we have a few things just creating our HTML page to look nice, but in terms of bigger content, we have a table that we're placing in there, and that has the names and the distances of my locations from Yelp. And we're showing a map as well, which is good. So we got our table and a map. It's a pretty powerful transformer, definitely worth checking out. And then we can just run this. So let's go. I'll run it right through, and then we'll check out the output. See what we get. Where am I getting Uber Eats today? Oh, so we've got some juice places. I've gotten a better result than 3,000, which is good. Otherwise, it would be sending me to parks and I would starve. But instead, it's suggested some local juice places. I can cheat actually because this one has some nice burgers, and Paradise Juice sounds good to me. And all these are nice and close to my house, which I like. But still a little bit of distance to them, so I can get either a walk-in or have them send me some snacks. But again, if you take this out of context a bit, this is quite powerful. It's bringing information right to your browser. In fact, in the second demo we do today, we're going to do something similar, where we're, again, just getting you information right where you need it. I'm going to pass it over to Jen, and we're going to talk about taking this and automating it.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so what we're going to do for the second half of this scenario is take the workspace that Brian just built inside FME Desktop, and we're going to push that to FME Server. And we are going to need to make a few changes to the workspace in order to sort of make it run as we want it to inside our automation. But I'll go through those whilst the automation is actually running. But some of the key things we're going to look at here is how you can build an automation in FME Server. So that's sort of like a workflow in the web that responds to a trigger, does some of your FME processing, and then will give you an output of some kind. So that could be pushing to some external web source, moving data somewhere, or sending an email, for example. So we're also going to go through publishing the workspace. So we can now do that through the web UI. So I'll show everyone how to do that. And then as part of the automation, we're going to have a look at using one of the triggers, which is watching a Dropbox folder. And we're going to have the automation send us an email when it's finished processing, which will contain the information in the report that Brian just showed us in Desktop. So I'm going to come out of here and swap to FME Server now. So as I mentioned, I'll show the actual workspace whilst the automation is running. In Desktop, Brian was using the feature caching to sort of run the workspace bit by bit. But because I've had an iPhone for a really long time now, I think Apple has collected so much data on me, the workspace takes longer and longer to run each time. So whilst the automation is running, I'll show you the workspace. But just to get started here, I'll show you how you can build the automation. So the left-hand menu bar for 2020 has had a refresh. So hopefully it's more intuitive for you to find what you're looking for in FME Server. So under the Automations tab here, I'm just going to click on Build an Automation. And if you're new to FME Server, it gives you a bit of a getting started guide to begin with, just to talk you through how you can build your automation. But it's always going to start you off with a trigger. So as I mentioned, a trigger is something that sort of will kick off your automation or that automated workflow. So we have a list of options available in here, as you can see. I'll just scroll down. So some of the more popular ones are from a schedule or receiving an email coming in. The one that we're actually going to be using today for this scenario is when a Dropbox directory is modified. So what I'm going to be doing on my phone, which I'm actually going to show you after we've built the automation, is when I'm exporting the data from Apple Health, it gives me a few different options about what I want to do with the zip file that it creates. So one of those options, because I have the Dropbox app installed on my phone, is to just upload it straight there. So that way, when Apple Health is letting me export it, I can just export straight to Dropbox. And then FME server will know that new data has arrived in Dropbox and then just automatically start processing it. So I only have to worry about one step of that workflow once it's built. So once you've selected that you want the Dropbox directory modified, that's the trigger that we're going to be using. There's a few parameters here that we need to set. So one of these will be the access token. So when you're creating a sort of Dropbox triggers or actions, you will need to have created a token from within your Dropbox account just so that you can manage your applications within Dropbox. So I'm just going to paste that in there. And then in my Dropbox account, I've created a subfolder called health data. So that's the path that I'm going to be watching here for new data coming in. So I'm going to type that in here. Because it's the root folder, you just start it with a slash, and then it's the first sort of subfolder under the root here. I'm not interested in watching for any subdirectories. I'm just going to be uploading my zip file straight to this folder. And then I want to deselect delete. Because I'm sort of re-uploading my zip file and overwriting it, otherwise it also triggers a delete, but because it's deleting a file, there's no data for the workspace to process. So in this instance, having the delete event isn't useful. So I'm going to leave those set to create and modify, and then apply that. And then you can see that the trigger has changed now. It's saying that it's a Dropbox watch. So the next one we're going to do is we want, whenever sort of Dropbox is triggered and it's got new data, we want that to run a workspace. So clicking on the sort of yellow plus icon at the bottom, we now want to add an action to our automation. So this one is an FME server action. So something that will be happening within FME server. So in this case, we are running a workspace. So I can click on side this node and it will give me some options. Some of the other internal actions that you can run, things like merge messages if you're waiting for multiple upstreams to sort of be finished and get to that point. You can log messages and also do some filtering. But in this case, we just want to run the workspace that Brian built earlier. So I'm going to choose that workspace, so one that I've already uploaded. And then we need to set these input parameters. So as Brian mentioned, he's hosting the biggest World Tour event from his living room. So I'm going to go and attend that one. I'm going to be in Vancouver. And my destination HTML file is set into the FME server just temp folder. That's okay. I'm going to leave that as it is. And the Dropbox path location, I don't know this right now. So what we need to do is get that information from the Dropbox trigger upstream. That will know what data has been uploaded and it will know the full path to that data. So using this dropdown, it allows me to select some upstream messages or sort of information coming out of those upstream nodes within the automation. So for this one, I'm going to use one of the Dropbox output keys here, which is for the file path. So once data has been uploaded to Dropbox, it will be able to pass that information downstream here. So we're going to be taking the file path. And then for the file, I need to make sure I'm choosing the right geopackage that has the updated Vancouver in it. So I believe it should be this one, just to make sure that's set correctly. So now I'm happy that that looks good. Those are all the workspace parameters set correctly. So again, I can just press apply, and then it puts the name of the workspace here, so I can see what is connected to. So what you'll notice now is, perhaps if you haven't seen FME Server 2020 before, but you are familiar with 2018, one of the new features in 2020 is the ability to output data or attributes, different features, from a workspace downstream in the automation. So previously we only had success and failure ports, which would depend on whether the workspace ran successfully or in case it failed. You can connect things to these ports. But now in 2020, we've added an automations writer, which allows you to pass data and features out of the workspace. So that's what I'm going to be connecting to here. Whilst this automation is running, we will take a look at the workspace and have a look at the automations writer. But for now, what we want to do is add an email action. So these are the blue ones down here. These are external actions, which basically mean it's going to do something outside of FME. So for example, sending an email, that's outside of FME. So once again, I can click on here. It will open the parameters for me to set. And just as I scroll down to find email, you can have a look at what other external actions are available. So again, if we wanted to go and upload that data back to Dropbox, we could do that. But in this case, we're just going to be sending an email. And then one thing, just to make it a little bit easier for people, if you are using emails and automations, you can click on Load Template. And if you're using one of these sort of popular email providers, just makes it easier. You don't have to necessarily remember the SMTP server or the right ports. You can just put that, preload that information in there from the templates. So I've got an email address that I've already set up to use. So I'm just going to type that in here. And then for the password for this account, I actually have set up an application password. So what I always find with email accounts and FME server, or I guess any application that needs to use your email account, you never really want to put in your password that you would use to log in yourself. Most email providers support the creation of an application password. So this means that the email provider knows it's not you using your email account, it's like an authorized application on your behalf. So it just means you're less likely to get flagged for security issues and have your email account sort of temporarily blocked or suspended from the application. So I've put in that password in here. Just going to copy this because I'm going to need this further down. So for the email too, I'm going to email this to myself, put my email address in there. And the email from just needs to make sure it's the same email from as the SMTP account, unless you've set up aliases on your account, but most don't have that. And then now I need to fill in the email sort of details, things we're actually interested in as an end user, what we'll be receiving. So as I mentioned before, we can pass data out of our workspace now once it's ran. So I'm actually going to be generating these fields from within the workspace. So again, just like we did to select the Dropbox file path, I can go and choose some information from my upstream messages. So I know that inside my workspace, I'm generating the fields for the email subject, the email body, and the email attachment. So I can just go in here and select the right ones for this. So I can go in here again, use the drop down to find the email attachment, which will actually be a link to the file path of that HTML file and where it lives on FME server. And then for the email body, I'm actually going to open the text editor, which is similar to what you would see inside FME desktop or inside Workbench when you're editing different parameters for transformers. And in here, I can just add a personal message to myself, say hello, and then I'm going to add in the body text here, just to make it a bit more friendly, because the workspace doesn't necessarily know who is going to be the recipient of this email. So I can type that in here in the automation. So now I think that's all the parameters that I need to set in here. So just to check that everything looks good, I can press validate. And it looks like it swapped that back over to my super user. Hopefully now if I validate, it'll be correct. So it's always good to go and validate things like email connections to make sure that it's working properly. And in this case, it doesn't seem to be. I'm not sure why.
Change the password again, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. I copied and pasted it from Slack, so maybe it did do that.
They
Let's
might have
go.
changed it maybe if it had preset.
Yeah.
There
Okay. So be warned just in case you have all those Google remembers all of your things and then it sneakily goes and changes them. So always a good idea to validate your email parameters in here. So now that that's successful, those have stayed the same. I can apply that. So now automation is good to run. So before I start my automation, I'm going to save it. So call this platforms scenario 1 webinar, and press OK. So now that's saved, we can start our automation. And you'll notice now we get this big orange banner across the top. Our automation is running. If we wanted to change any settings within any of these nodes, we would have to stop our automation, edit them, and then restart it. So now I'll show you actually uploading the data to Dropbox now. So if I go into my health app, if anybody here has an iPhone and they're interested, when it loads up, you kind of see the summary page and you can click on your icon in the top right-hand corner. And then you have the option at the bottom to export all health data. So as I mentioned, I've had an iPhone for a while. So it takes a little while to prepare it and just pull all of that information and extract it. But that should give us an export.zip file that it will then prompt me what I want to do with it. So you can see here, I can just save that straight to Dropbox. It's going into that health data folder I mentioned, and then we'll save it in there. Okay, that looks good. So now if we go back to here, we should be able to just check that this has picked up that new data in Dropbox. So you can go to the menu option at the top left, click on the log file. And then one of my favorite new features, maybe this is a little bit sad, but it's showing the log file in reversed order in FME Server. So normally what it does by default is show you the oldest at the top and then the newest at the very bottom. This little reverse button means you're always going to see the most recent things at the top of your log file. So you can see in this case, it started watching our Dropbox folder, it connected, it found that export.zip folder, and now the workspace has started running. So whilst the workspace is running, I'll actually show you how we adapted the workspace for FME Server. So we've got this open here, and I'll just zoom in a little bit to the most important changes are at the beginning and the end of the workspace. So what we saw with Brian was the Apple Steps extractor. This is where the workspace started. What we've done in this workspace to make it sort of serverable is added a Dropbox connector before that Apple Steps extractor. So this just means that as we're publishing and saving our data to Dropbox, we need a way to get that data out of Dropbox and sort of into our workspace so we can actually work with and process that data. So the creator just sort of starts the workspace running. This Dropbox connector is set up with a publish parameter, which is taking that Dropbox source file path. So that is what we set inside the automation, and we're taking that value from the Dropbox trigger so that we'll always have the correct path to download from. And then we're just downloading that to the temporary shared resources on FME Server. And then this path here, we're copying that into the Apple Steps extractor so that it's always processing the same data. So that you can see that path matches there. It's going to the shared resource temp folder. My workspace, I'm only taking the last 7 days. All of these days in this sort of weird lockdown state merge into one. So I can't actually remember when I've done any long walks. Just hopefully my steps are bigger than Brian's, we'll see. And I think I maybe have slightly different values inside here for search terms. We can take a look. Yeah, so I think I've set different step values or parameters than Brian. If it's less than 1,000, I should probably definitely get out for a walk, get some fresh air. If it's less than 1,000, or sorry, if it's more than 1,000 but less than 5,000, probably going to go to a grocery store, a local one, and try and find something to buy and cook at home, which hopefully be a little bit healthier. But if I've done more than 5,000 steps, then I'll treat myself, go get some dessert or an ice cream. And then most of the rest of the workspace is the same, apart from this section. So we're still writing out that HTML report to a location on FME server so that we can attach it with the email. We also thought it would be nice to include some of that information in the email body. So what this is doing here is taking out the JavaScript that the HTML report generator is adding. So as part of the report, it was showing you a map that has the different points for the locations returned by the Yelp connector. So we're actually stripping that out inside this bookmark here because email providers won't send emails that include JavaScript. So otherwise you get a big sort of blank area in your email body. So we're just stripping that out here. And then this is the exciting new part for 2020, which is the automations writer. So here it behaves just as any other writer. You add it to your workflow, and any attributes that you want to pass out into your automation to be accessed downstream in your automation, you would just create your attributes in here, just as you would any other type of writer. So you can see here I've got my email body, subject, and attachment, which we used in the automation. So it's pretty simple to use, and then you can access all of that information. So one thing as well to be aware of is every single feature that comes out of here, the automations writer, will sort of start a downstream process in your automation. So if I had 100 features coming out of here, I would probably end up with 100 emails in my automation that we just built. So that's one thing to be aware of. I did mention as well that you can now publish workspaces through the web UI. So let me just save this one now to my desktop. So I'll call this scenario 1 server version. And then we'll try and upload this version of the workspace as well to our website with a webinar, so everyone will be able to access this and play with it for themselves. So now I'll go back to the FME server web UI. And if you want to publish your workspaces through the web UI, you can go to the Workspaces tab, Manage Workspaces. And then if I find the Platform Scenarios folder, once you're inside any folder in your sort of Workspaces section, you've now got the option here to upload. So drag and drop works as well, or you can go and navigate to it and select it and just upload it through the web interface. So you can see here, we don't have version control turned on this server, so it's just giving me a warning. And then just as you would in the publishing wizard, you can configure the services you want to run your workspace against. So by default, job submitter will be selected. If I wanted to stream the report back, for example, you can do drop down, you can choose which writer you want to stream. So it's configurable just the same way as the publish wizard would be. So once you press confirm, that uploads it to FME server then. But one thing to be aware of is that it doesn't publish any sort of auxiliary information with the workspace. So anything like web connections, database connections, custom transformers, or packages. So if you have a workspace that contains any of those kind of items, you will need to use the publish wizard at least once. Once they're up on your server, you're good to go, and then you can use the web interface to upload your workspaces if you wanted to. So hopefully by now that automation should have run, so we can go back and have a look at it. So we can go to our Manage Automations tab. We called it the Platform Scenario 1 webinar. So I can select that one, go to Actions, and we'll take a look at the log file to see what's going on. So you can see that the workspace ran, it completed successfully. I know it's got that email information in there and just telling me that it successfully sent the email. So hopefully now if I go and check in my email account, there should be a new email, hopefully. Yep. So now we've got the suggestions for Vancouver emailed in. And looks like I did have a lower step average last week. I only got 3,500 basically steps. So it's recommending that I go to a grocery store to get my food. Not as lucky as Brian who gets to Uber Eats. So hopefully that covers all of those features. We had a look at the automations writer, how easy that is to set up, and just sort of behaves as any other writer. It just gives you output features within your automation. We published a workspace through the web UI, and we had a look at some of those triggers inside automations and different ways you can send out those automated alerts and notifications. So in this scenario, we were doing email. So now I'm going to pass it back to Brian, who's going to take us through what's new in FME desktop and authoring workspaces.
Great, thank you, Jen. So this is a section to quickly talk about some of the new features in 2020 on the desktop and engine side and FME Hub. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this because we've recently done some deeper dive webinars with demos and much more detail than I'm going to cover here. And you can click these links to watch those. They're fantastic. The first thing to talk about is performance gains. We've made incredible strides here in 2020. Shapefile and Excel are probably number 1 and 2 in formats in our statistics. So they're highly, highly used. We've rewritten Shapefile and we've made Excel quite a bit faster. So highly recommend 2020 for those. I talked about the statistics calculator being in some cases 100 times faster, which is incredible. Another one that we didn't show today is the buffer, which got a complete rewrite as well. It is faster and does a really great job. So look for those in 2020. And the last part about performance I'm going to show actually is the fact that the data inspector is much faster at streaming or showing you 3D data. And here's a quick example of that. I'm hoping through the GoToMeeting it will register fairly smoothly for you. But this is a case where the frame rate we've actually doubled under the hood, and so panning and zooming around 3D models is much more efficient. Great experience or luxurious experience, as our lizard is enjoying here, also applies to desktop. We've done something that is quite interesting, which is allowing you to color the different lines in your workspace. In fact, in the next demo, we do this, and that's because I wanted to be able to highlight for myself what happens when the data passes or fails a test. And so the failed data actually gets a red line. And what's great about this is in a big workspace, you can really see the pathways that your data is taking. And it's very simple as you can apply the styling to all the downstream elements inside the workbench or upstream. It's quite a good feature. I think it was very highly requested on our ideas forum, might have been number 3 perhaps. And so it's great that we've been able to make that improvement. We showed the statistics calculator that had a facelift. And we've also done a lot of work under the hood with our Esri formats. In particular, because of things like the utility network coming through, we wanted to make sure that our technology is working with all the new functionality on the ArcGIS side. So here's a bit of a look at the new things in the engine. So many new formats have been added. A few things to highlight: Google BigQuery and BigQuery GIS are great. There's some really good content out on our knowledge base about how to use this. Snowflake as well. The one that's interesting to me is Proj is a new coordinate system transformer that we're probably going to be seeing a lot of in the future. So those libraries have been added to FME. And one I particularly like, ECW, we've revamped the library, and it is, again, another one of those that has seen increased performance with this release, which is great. In our deep dive webinar, we talk lots about all of these different formats, and there's some demos as well, so check that out. Connecting to machine learning, we're going to use machine learning in our second demo here. And we also talk about this more during the World Tour week. In particular, day 4, there's a talk by Dimitri, and he talks a little bit about some of these tools as well. So check that out. I'm not going to dive too deep on XML because we're planning to do a webinar on this. And I think, Stephanie, if you're there, can you talk about what the plan is? Because it's crazy to me. What is the plan for that? Crazy
You know,
webinar.
it might make me weep a little bit. It sounds like Don wants to do like a no time limit XML webinar where it's just like 8 hours of XML. But but we'll see what actually comes to light.
Yeah. Okay, so I won't steal any thunder there, but there has been some great improvements. Thanks, Steph. And finally, just improve Revit support. So we released a Revit native reader in FME 2019, but really in FME 2020, this has gotten much more functionality added to it. Uh, yeah, again, we went deep in the other webinar, but there are many enhancements, too many to write about on here. One of them that I find really interesting is actually the simplification geometry tools. So the center line replacer has the ability to take floor plans, 2D floor plans, and really remove the fact that a wall has two um, lines to it because it is a wall and there's space between each side of that wall, but you can use a centerline replacer to do simplification, which is really great for moving 3D data into things like IMDF format for indoor mapping. And this came from the community, just a nice quote at the bottom, where it shows a user named David Rassner mentioned how much more quickly he could do work when he used FME. And in this case, he was showing FME to some project managers, and they were really blown away by it. The fact that he could do some basic cost estimation and automate that in one afternoon using FME. So highly recommended if you're using any Revit 3D modeling. All right, now let's step into the second demo that we're going to show. This is a demo where we in our heads, we thought, what if with this wellness theme, we didn't have a safe office per se, but instead we managed a safe spa? And so that's where you've seen this lizard, our friend the lizard, and our friend the zipster hanging out. And they're really our VIPs. And so we wanted to make sure that if they were driving and parking at the spa, they had a space available and no one was stealing any of the parking spots. So we built an app. We built an app to help us validate anyone parked in our lot. And so for a special treat here, we've created a video of us using the app. And once you take a look at that, we'll come back and we'll figure out how we built it. I'm Brian.
I'm Jen, and we are Safe Spa Parking Enforcement Officers.
We are looking for any attendees of our Safe Spa who are invalidly parking in our parking lot.
And how are we going to do that?
We're going to use a fancy FME app to do that.
Let's
Ready?
go. Yeah.
Let's go do it.
Yep.
So I've got a car here. Has a bit of a suspect license plate, I think.
It looks like they're trying too hard.
They're trying very hard. But what we're going to do is use our FME Express app, which I'm going to open up, and we're going to connect to an FME app. And so I've got my app here. Jen, I'm going to take a picture and use the camera, and we're going to see what happens.
So how will we know if they're allowed to park here?
Well, their plates are registered with us. And what this is doing is going out to the database to ensure that this plate is mapped to our database. And we're using machine learning to do that.
Okay.
So this is good. Let's see, we've got a response. Aha, success. Vehicles registered and allowed to park. That's very good.
Yep, okay.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
So we should keep checking to make sure
keep
everyone else
checking.
is allowed to park here.
That's right. Pretty easy.
So this plate looks suspicious.
Very suspicious.
Yeah, let's check them out.
So this says Love FME, quite an interesting one. Now what do we do if this car is unregistered?
We'll probably need to get them removed from the spa parking lot.
Like fully tow them?
Yes,
Okay,
so we'll need to let our facilities know that they are not allowed to park here.
Okay, here we go. Let's try it out.
So will this also tell us if someone is not allowed to park here?
Yes, so it's gonna give us a report, and even better, you know what it does? It emails our facilities team.
Oh.
this vehicle is not registered
Oh, no.
in the system. We better get our facility
Yep.
team on this right away.
Yep, and get them towed. So how did you build the app?
Well, why don't I show you in FME?
Okay, welcome back. So let's talk about this app quickly. Well, what does it do? It goes and sends an image that we took with the phone to Amazon's machine learning tools, and it analyzes the photograph and tries to take any text that it finds in there and report back to you, the user, what that text was. And so what we do with that is we cross-reference it with a database of license plates, and we report out the results. So not too complicated, but some cool tools used to do that. Again, I want to get meta. I want to talk about at a high level. It's a funny example, but how does it relate to you? Well, as a user, connecting to different data sources is super key and very much FME's bread and butter. So in this case, we've got some actual field data. Someone's out in the field taking imagery, and we're going to connect that with a database along the way. We're going to transform that. We're going to make some decisions based off of it. And of course, automating it via app or an FME server app or FME Express makes the process absolutely seamless. Let's check it out. A few things to watch for while we show you how we built this. As I mentioned, FME server apps and Data Express, those are how you can appify the logic inside a workspace. Remember, there's really two things that you do from the very beginning of this slide deck. Two steps: one, build the logic, and two, figure out how you want that logic to run. And so in this case, we've got an app that's going to do that for us. I used this in the first demo, the HTML report generator. It's pretty awesome. But in this case, we're pairing it with something even better, which is the data streaming service. And that's going to allow us to show that report right back to the user once it's been built in their phone or on a browser. And finally, I didn't mention this in the first half, but in best practice land, you really want to use annotations and bookmarks as much as possible, and even the styled connection lines, because all of that helps you understand what was built in the workspace. And in fact, if you come back to it a month later, you may forget what you were trying to do, or if you're sharing this with a coworker or colleague, you want to be as clear as possible as to what is being built inside the workspace. All right, this is what we're building. We're building a nice report again. It's got the text that Amazon's built out, and it tells you whether you've successfully parked that car, if it's allowed to park, or is it something that we need to tow? Get it out of there so the lizard has a spot. So let's show them how we did that, Jen. I'm going to pass the screen back to you.
Okay, so let's take this to FME server. And then what we can do inside FME server is actually take a look at the workspace that is powering our app in this case. So that's this one. So Brian, are you going to tell us what you did here, what this workspace is doing?
Yeah, let's talk about it really quickly. So hopefully you can see that there. The first thing it does is it takes in the image. And in this case, what's nice is it's taking it right from our phone when we take the picture. And from there, it sends that image to an Amazon Recognition Connector transformer. And really what this is doing is it's taking the image, it's doing analysis of text, which is a setting in here. There's a few other things that you can have it potentially look for. And it's going to report out all the different pieces of text as features. And so actually that creates a nice challenge. If you want to move a little bit to the right there, Jen, the database is a database of all of our license plates, and I need to check that. But actually, in fact, I need to know after all of these features pass through this database joiner, I actually need the result of what happened to all of them at once. And that's kind of tricky to do inside FME. So again, I need to kind of, after all the processing is done, get a report on what happened so that I can pass it to the tester. And to do that, I used a transformer called the aggregator. And so what that does is it packs up all of those features into one specific feature. It's nice because the database joiner adds a feature called matched records. And so if any of those matched records were greater than 1, it means my image found a match in the database, and I know that registered or that vehicle is registered. And so that's what my test is doing. It's asking, was there a match? And if there was, happy days. And if there wasn't, that's where the trouble comes in. So we get that report built and we get an email going out to our facilities team, and a HTML file is sent back to the user to tell them what happened.
Okay.
That's how it works, Jen.
Yeah, so I think we can go and have a look at how we actually built that app now. So under the workspaces option, we have the menu option for server apps. So when you're looking to create an app, you can click on the build an app. You can give it a name, a description. You will need to choose a workspace that you want the app to run. And then what you can do in here as well, choose the service. So for our parking app, we want it to use the data streaming service. So once the user has used the app and put in their information, uploaded that picture, we want to stream back that information to the user so they'll see it in their browser or on their phone. You can choose when you want your application to expire. So I think by default, it gives you 10 years. If we knew the spa was only going to be open for, say, a few weeks, we could have the expiration time set to coincide with the closure of the spa, just so you don't give people access to your application longer than they need it to. And we want to enable here that the user can upload things. Obviously, we need them to be able to upload an image of the car, of the license plate that they're checking. And then under here, if you open the parameters option, any sort of published parameters that are available in the workspace will get listed here. And it's up to you whether you want to make those available to the end users. So for example, this parking facilities at safe, we probably wouldn't necessarily want to show that in the application. I can turn that off because you wouldn't necessarily need them to change their email address. That should be hard coded. So we're just going to leave that source JPEG file as shown in app. And then under here as well, under the customize option, you've got a few more options here. You can add in a title for your app, a background color, a heading image, and an icon. And you can also add the option now, which is new, to run immediately. So you can, if your workspace doesn't have any input parameters, it used to look a little bit awkward in 2019. So it would sort of give you all of this information, all of this stuff here, but no parameters, and the user would still have to press run. So now when you have it set to run immediately, it just basically runs the workspace and then will give you the response without needing the user to press the run button. And then one thing we could have done inside our application is actually require authentication. If you know that Brian and I are the only safe spa parking enforcement officers, we could require authentication that just required me and Brian to be able to log in and use this app so that anybody couldn't just go in there and start reporting cars. So what I'm actually going to do is show one that I built earlier, which is the Safe Spa Parking app, just because this has the right colors and the right heading image in here ready. So for background color, it just brings up a little box. You can choose a color. I've chosen a nice relaxing green that tries to match the picture of the lizard and the zipster, relaxing at the spa. So what we can do is go back to this page now, which shows all of the server apps that have been built. And then if we want to view it and actually run it live, just like an end user would, you can click on the binoculars icon here, which opens the FME server app. And then you can see in our browser here what you saw that was displaying on our phones during the video. So I'm going to upload an image of a car license plate that I have saved on my desktop. So let's choose this car picture. Okay, and then we'll run our app. And then this should show us the report that Brian showed us in the slides. So it looks like the car of the picture I uploaded is allowed to park at the spot. So now we can take it back to the presentation and have a look at what is new inside automating your workspaces in FME 2020. So this is just taking a look at some of the new features in FME Server. So as Brian mentioned for desktop, we won't go into too much depth with these because we've already done the webinars on these that go into a lot more detail and a deeper dive on these new features. So this is just more of a recap. So this is one of the things that we saw in scenario 1 here, being able to use the FME Server Automations Writer. So what this also does is allow you to implement enterprise integration patterns. If anybody's heard of those, there's a book, can't recall off the top of my head who it's by, but basically it's a lot of different patterns or like small repeatable things that you can do that build up larger enterprise integrations. So we have started to write a few knowledge center articles on those, on how you can start to build those within FME. So if that's something you're interested in, I would check that out. And we've also now give you the option to disallow concurrent jobs in Workspace node. So if a job is already in progress and say you've scheduled it to run say every 15 minutes, but the previous one is already still in progress, you can then skip that scheduled job. So it will just start running again once the other job has completed. You can add automations and all of its dependencies to an FME Server project now. So before you would need to kind of remember all of the different things your automation was working with. So things like all your workspaces, you would have to remember to import those manually into your project. Now at the time you're importing your automation to the project, it will ask you if you want to bring everything through. And you can also start to build looping workflows within automations. So again, we have a Knowledge Center article available on that. And then these new features in FME Server apps, I just mentioned, the authentication, so you can select users that you want to be able to run your app. They have to be FME Server users, so you'll create them a username and password inside FME, inside the user management. I mentioned the option to run immediately. And then one thing we didn't cover, which is actually a pretty cool new feature, and I've been asking for this for a long time actually, is the ability to add a geometry picker for your FME Server apps. So now when you're running it and you're expecting an input, it will bring up a map window for you, and you can click on a point or you can draw a polygon that you want to use as an input for your workspace. So for example, scenario 1, we could have potentially adapted this to, instead of typing in what city we were at, we could have added it as an FME Server app, added this map coordinate picker, and we could have selected our location from the map here. So that's another cool new feature in 2020. As I mentioned, there's been some look and feel updates. So the menu bar on the left-hand side has had a refresh. I think there's some styling changes. You can see the time zone on the schedules page, uploading workspaces. We had a look at that, and as well as configuring services in the web UI. So if you are uploading your workspaces in FME Server through the web, once you've uploaded it and you've configured those services and you realize you want to change those or reconfigure it, you can do that from within the web UI as well. It's not just a at time of publish kind of thing. And as well, the security in FME Server has had some enhancements. So you can set a password expiry time now and make sure your users are resetting their password, say every 60 or 90 days. You're now forced to reset your admin password. When you first install FME Server, you'll give it a new password. You can prevent multiple user sessions so that people aren't logged into FME Server from either different machines or different browsers. You can restrict that to only one user session at a time. And the administrator can send broadcast messages out. So these could be things like FME Server is going down for maintenance or it's being upgraded between certain times. So users know not to be doing anything on FME Server at that time. Or if you're like some people, let's say if you can write cheeky messages to people asking them to upgrade your server for you. And then what's new in FME mobile apps? So we do have a couple of different mobile apps available in the app stores. So we have the FME AR application. So this allows you to look at your data in augmented reality. So this is an example here I think Dimitri made where he's got different places loaded into his FME AR app. So as he looks around now, they're sort of in the right location in the real world. So it tells him where like Port Moody is or the Indian Arm. So it's added support for geolocated models, which is showing here. We've also added scaling, so you can load models on a 1-to-1 scale, or you can choose from a list of scaling options if you want to adjust it. We can also now support below surface models. So if you've got things underground, maybe like pipes or cables, you should be able to see those in the FME AR app as well now. And then Data Express is what the parking enforcement officers were using for scenario 2. So you can actually launch your workspaces from your phone. So those will just connect to FME server apps or FME server workspaces. So as I mentioned, there's that map picker. Just like that, you can select your location from within FME Data Express. And you can also read QR codes and barcodes now and use the data from those as a parameter value for your workspace. And that's it. So hopefully you enjoyed that and learned a few things, different things that you can do within the FME platform and some of the things of what's new in 2020. So thank you everybody for watching.
Yep, thanks everybody.